Hello and welcome to another episode of R&R's Ask the Expert. I'm Kayla McGowan, Editor-in-Chief, and today we have an engaging and important topic to discuss. So for those of you who may not know, on August 19th, the Smithtown Library faced a catastrophic event when flash floods poured over 7 inches of rain on Long Island. The library's bottom level was inundated with a ton of water and mud, of course, that damaged computers, books, and documents. Thousands of books and documents were affected, with some of them noteworthy, but also some of them dating back to the 17th century. Well, one thing that I will mention that is really cool is there was a town deed and letter signed by none other than Thomas Jefferson. In response to this crisis, these precious items were sent to Prism Specialties, and they use advanced technology on the historical collection, and it is currently undergoing some restoration. It's estimated that 80 to 90% of these pieces will be successfully restored. Our special guest today is Adam Lyszczarz, a Marine Corps veteran and the program management or manager for document restoration services at Prism Specialties in Southeast Michigan. With over a decade of experience in the restoration industry, Adam specializes in document restoration and disaster response. He is dedicated to preserving important documents and historical materials, bringing both hands-on expertise and innovative solutions to our industry. Please welcome Adam.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome. So this is such a cool project. Before we dive into all of that, let us all know how you got into this industry. I love to hear how everybody got here and what made you specialize in this specific area of our industry.
Well, if you were to tell me 20 years ago that I'd be restoring documents, one, I didn't even know the industry existed. I was just recently separated from the military and I was finishing up my college degree when our VA rep at the college reached out to me saying that they had job positions at a local restoration company, but it was unique because they needed security clearances. Um, and if you're familiar with security clearances, very few people have them in the civilian world, but veterans do. So it turned out that there was a document restoration company that had a project for a three-letter agency that required security clearances to restore their documents. I was hired into that as a simple technician, and they deemed me worthy of promotions after that project and keeping me on. And I kind of just fell into the industry after that.
Yeah, I was gonna say most of us just happen to stumble if it's not, a family tradition to be in this space. So that's really interesting to hear that. I've spoke to another individual that is in the restoration space as well, and he did talk about clearance that's needed. And oftentimes people don't think about that, so it's really unique. And it looks like it all paid off, right, for you.
Yeah,
We're
I've been
gonna
doing it for about 15 years now, so.
Can you walk us through the initial assessment and response when you arrived to the flood damaged Smithtown Library?
Absolutely. So, even before I arrived on site, we were called in by our contractor who was doing the mitigation at the library, which was Rainbow Restoration of Long Island. He stated that there was a large quantity of damaged books and he needed our specialty services. The basement level of the library took on 8 feet of water. So the standard ceiling size is 8 feet, maybe 10. So water was completely up to the ceiling. They worked tirelessly to pump that water out, and actually they were assisted by the local fire departments because it was such a large quantity. I received pictures once they could access that of the basement level and the room that was in question that actually housed all their historic precious items. Once we deemed that the quantity was of a giant size, I had to get eyes on it. I flew out immediately, arrived the next morning. By then, all the water was gone. Um, the conditions weren't ideal. Obviously, there was no power, quite a bit of moisture and humidity in the area. And when I looked at this research room, it was just an absolute disaster. Shelving units were buckled. All the paper and books were swelled to the point that they kind of created this roller coaster effect on the shelves because there was nowhere to go. Even if you looked at the ceiling, you can see imprints of the papers and books that were touching the ceiling and as they came down. It was quite a disaster. And then learning what the items were made it even more devastating.
Yeah, that's very crazy. I'm sure to walk in there and see that, right? I'm sure you had some idea, but when you walked in, I'm sure it was a lot different, right? I will say it's nice to hear that all of the water was already gone. I will say that that's a relief in itself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The contractor worked tirelessly, as well as a lot of government officials were called in to assist. They had the fire department there pumping water out with their giant hoses. I mean, I've been through several document losses, large scale, but I've never seen that quantity of water. It was just astounding. I mean, even the top shelves of the books were completely saturated. There was nothing dry in the room.
That's a little scary. Where did all of the water intrusion come from? Where was the source? I know there's a lot of water, so that, it could have been anywhere, but I'm just interested to hear kind of where that
Yeah.
vulnerability was.
So apparently it was record rainfall that created flood damage. On the side of the building, there was the typical outside basement staircase and a window located there. And the basement staircase actually filled up and burst through the window. There's actually a video online of watching, they have security cameras, and you can actually watch the flood water come in, and it just reminds you of a disaster movie or a ship that struck an iceberg. Just the water's flooding in, and it came in at such a high rate that the room that the historic items were actually housed in was a very secure room. The door actually held, the walls actually caved in to allow the water to rush in.
Wow, that's very interesting to hear. And, how old is the library by chance?
I'm not really sure. I know it definitely has some historic provenance. The house next door to it, George Washington visit. I know that the library has gone under some significant renovations in the past years because it is very well upkept. But I'd be interested to know. It is an older building.
Yeah, that's interesting. The door did its job, but unfortunately, that is a lot of water, though. I will say
That
that.
that is a ton of water. That's more than, any Olympic-sized pool or anything like that. I believe the quantity was upwards of 80,000 gallons, maybe even the 100,000 gallons.
That is so crazy to hear. And to hear the contractors did their job and cleaning all of that up is amazing.
Yeah.
So, of course, there's many challenges that you face in a situation like this, but what were some of the most significant challenges you and your team faced during the restoration process of these documents and artifacts? I mean, if we're going to be honest, a 17th century piece is
Mhm.
nothing to sneeze at. So I'm
No,
sure
it is
that was a
not.
little complicated.
So, on a typical document, loss conditions are never good. In this case, it was flood water, so you had the typical moisture. There was no electricity. The floors were covered with a silty film from the dirt. But in this case, the main challenges were separating their highest priority items from the rest of the items. Seeing as there was that much water, very few things actually stayed at their place of origin. Many things clumped up together in piles on the floors or between the shelves. And being covered in silt, it's very difficult to determine what was what. I mean, just soggy masses of paper are very hard to determine. So, with the library staff, and they were hands-on with us the entire step and entire duration of it, they were managed to separate the items that they wanted saved with priority versus the other items, which not saying that they weren't important, but they had their priorities of what they really needed saved. So the library staff and their experience separated those items for us. Um, those are the ones that we took extra care with. Those are the ones that we rushed to get them into stabilization before they could deteriorate further because with such a quantity, it did take several days to pack out everything. So you wanted your items with the highest priority removed first.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, being a time is of the essence, I guess we can say here. And it's really cool to hear about the collaboration. I think, in our space, we collaborate very often, but for the library staff to jump in and help, I'm sure that made it a little bit easier on the team. Not saying this job was easy by any means, but I know that when you have help, especially with someone that's really near and dear to what you're handling, it just makes the job that much easier and more successful, to be completely honest. Um, so can you kind of explain the technology and techniques that you guys use to restore these items and potentially prevent mold growth, right? We've got water, and then you said a couple of days, sometimes that's a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely, and it truly was. So, a few of the things that we do very first off is we try to get everything into stabilization. And when it comes to document restoration, what items need to be stabilized with a freezer. So, what we did was we contracted a couple refrigerated semi-trailers to be dropped into the lot. And as we were removing the items after they've been thoroughly inventoried, we'd place them into freezer storage until those tractor trailers were full and ready for transportation. Even then, during the process, we noticed several of the books were beginning to mold right on the shelves, even before you can handle them. So mold was a factor. Once they get placed into stabilization, the freezer trucks, the mold will cease. So that, in essence, puts a stop at getting more damage to the paper items. Um, Once the trailers were loaded, we shipped them back to our facility, our document facility in Livonia, Michigan. From there, they stay in freezer storage until we're ready to place them into our vacuum freeze dryers, which are completely capable of drying about 600 cubic feet of documents at a time. So with the quantity that they had, I believe 2 to 3 chamber loads of vacuum chamber loads of documents till the entire job was dry. The priority items we did separate and we placed into our dedicated desiccant room because we wanted to monitor those individually. Those are the most important. We didn't want to bulk dry those. And then after the entire job was dried, we sent the entire project off to a gamma ray facility. And gamma ray is, the industry standard for document restoration to destroy mold. So the entire project received the gamma ray. So therefore, all the mold and bacteria is completely broken down and safe to handle. And currently, we're waiting on review from the library staff. They're going to fly into Michigan and review their items, and then they'll be placed into the actual restoration process of cleaning off every item, trying to salvage as much as possible. We're very confident that we can salvage the vast majority and we'll clean those items up, get them straightened, and deliver them back to the Smithtown Library.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear all of this, right? The process, it's long,
Yes.
and it makes sense why it is, right? And I think that's the importance of what we do. It's not about just doing the job, it's about doing the job right and ultimately leaving our customers happy at the end of the day. I mean, these are historical pieces of all of our history, not
That's
just a specific area, and I think that's extremely important. So I was going to ask you how you prioritized all of these things, but you kind of already touched on that. And, I
yeah.
think that that's important, and the collaboration hasn't stopped, right? They're coming out to look at
Mhm.
everything and assess everything. And they're going to help you through the entire process, which I think is extremely important. So we're sitting at almost a year, right? We're pretty close. I know it's only January, but by the time all of this happens, do you think it will be closer to a solid 365 before you guys get that stuff back?
Most likely, we're optimistic that we can get it back to them before that, but we got to set timelines. And you're absolutely right. The customer involvement was the most important part. It's never really our company's standpoint to determine what is priority for our customer. In this case, historic items are the most important, but and oftentimes it's something of sentimental value or business critical documents. And it's never really my staff's job to determine what is the most important for the customer. So having the library staff there every day, day in, day out, dedicated to really their life's work, and telling us what's the most important to them was the key factor.
Yeah, I was gonna say you were able to, really put those first, get them packed up and, get them into refrigeration essentially so that there weren't any additional damage. There wasn't any additional damage done to them. And I think that's extremely important. And it's interesting to hear all of this, right?
Mhm.
Because the world of content and just documentation, restoration, and things like that is really big. And if you don't really know it, it's interesting to hear, oh, you put it in refrigeration so it doesn't mold, right? And I think, hello, yes, you would know that after talking about it, but it's just one of those things that maybe many people don't know, especially if they're not in that space, right? If they're not really handling contents or documentation, it might be an interesting thing for them to maybe explore one day.
Absolutely. It's really like a sub-industry within our restoration industry. And it has its own unique challenges that, differ from, say, structural or mitigation.
Yeah, I was definitely going to say you can't, put a house in a refrigerated truck. So it's a
Right.
little different there. But I was definitely going to say, we do have a very interesting industry because it's not just restoration, it's not just cleaning, it's not just inspection. And what could you ultimately call us, So I think it's nice to hear kind of our subcategories within what we do, and it's interesting to see how we can still touch people's lives with something like documentation restoration. So I know this job is not over yet, but what are some of the lessons that you've learned from this particular project, and how do you think you could apply some of these lessons in the future? Not just only to preserving historical and cultural assets, but just in general, right? I think one of the common things is photographs. I think that is one thing that we all probably have in our home, or, maybe a birth certificate or something like that, So not just in the historical world, but in personal space as well.
Yeah, I mean, this job wasn't, well, every job is unique in their own right. This job in particular didn't give us any unique challenges that we haven't seen before, but it was a combination of just the conditions that we had to deal with. We had to, obviously deal with it's a basement level, so we needed the manpower to move items out of the basement. There was no power or an elevator. But really, I truly think that the factor that really saved this entire project was the collaboration with the client, the experience of my staff. They were phenomenal the whole time, and they worked, 24/7 to get this done. So the kudos really go to them. And this one was unique because it's a very historic one. Um, and this one actually made us feel really good to do. We hate that they had a loss, but this one really felt worthwhile. We have Thomas Jefferson's signature in the house. We have books from the 1800s, um, artwork from that's framed and in glass right now, and we're really looking forward to finishing off this project and seeing how good we can make these items. But back to your question about, photographs and birth certificates or the family Bible or anything like that. The main thing is really to know where it is. You can protect those items by putting them in plastic containers or safes, waterproof or fireproof safes. That's always a good precaution. But really, it comes down to knowing what you have and where it is. Because that gives a company like mine or a team like mine an idea of what to address first and what you're looking for. A magazine collection or comics or things like that that may be important to you for sentimental reasons versus, the pile of books that nobody's looked at. My team wouldn't know the difference unless you, as a customer, were able to pinpoint what you're looking for. And the library staff really did that for us on this project.
Yeah, I was gonna say every single project is unique, like you said, and it depends on the customer at the end of the day.
Mhm.
I know we see it in hurricanes and flooding and tornadoes and not and now fires, right? I think there's been a lot of stuff brought to light, especially with California, unfortunately facing a lot of fires. There's people who are going back to their homes and opening their safes and finding their stuff in better condition than what they thought, I guess is the nicest thing to say. But there is going to be a portion of restoration that goes into this, right? There's
Yes.
smoke and soot that, happens to get in there. But the most important thing is, at least you have the item that a professional like yourself can help, return it to as close as new condition for you so you can still utilize it and have those memories of those pieces. Um, so I look forward to hearing from you guys when this job is complete. I am sure that the library and even anybody that is close to this project is very thankful for all of your guys' time and effort. I can't imagine all of the time and resources that you guys have had to, use for this, right? Like you said, it's a ton of stuff. It's boxes and boxes of stuff. Not just documents, not just books. You've got art and everything like that, and they all have their own little specialty of handling and care for, right?
Absolutely.
Um, so thank you for being here with me today, but also thank you for all you do for the industry and the people that we serve. It's important to have these types of conversations. And before we go, any last words, maybe, um, advice or just, where you'd like to see some people apply some of the information you've shared today. I think it's important. You talked about some key processes that you can utilize to make sure that you're helping the customer as best as you can.
Yeah, I think the main one is when it comes to document restoration, I think most people would be surprised of what can actually be saved. That pile of mushy paper on the floor covered in mud is restorable. Those books that have been completely saturated or those photographs can be saved. Oftentimes, people write them off as it's just they can't figure out how it's done, so they just assume that it's total loss. And in most cases, we can save quite a bit. In the case of fires, we can save a ton. I mean, obviously, if it's, burnt to ashes, it's gone. But, burnt edges or smoke covered, they can be restored. So, a lot of important things, sentimental and historical, are on works on paper. And if they are deemed worthy to be restored, they can be.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially for those who may not be in the world of content, right? Or documentation restoration. I think it's huge because sometimes it's you look at it and you're like, how are we going to fix this, right? That's a normal thought, when you
Mhm.
walk into something and you don't really know. Um, but thank you for sharing that. I think it's extremely important. It's a great thing to share with our customers as well, even if it's not us that can particularly handle it. There's professionals like yourself that specialize in that. I think that's really important. So thank you for your time today, and I look forward to maybe catching up in the future to see, where this project has gone.
Absolutely. Anytime I'd be happy to.
Well, thank you guys for tuning in, and as always, we will see you on the next Ask the Expert. Take care.